Hello, and welcome back to Grave Whispers. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy whispers rising straight from the grave, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable. Dim the lights if you dare. Relax your mind. Let the outside world fade away. And let's begin. Story 1, I walked along a street that was crowded with abandoned cars, dead bodies, broken furniture, and spreading flowers. Yet somehow it still felt completely empty. My boots scraped over cracked pavement as I moved forward, kicking aside old newspapers, plastic bags, and clusters of pale flowers growing through the road. Every time my foot struck them, petals burst into the air. They spun around me for a few seconds before the wind carried them away between the buildings. The wind made a low, mournful sound as it passed through the narrow spaces between skyscrapers. It echoed against glass towers and old brick buildings, turning the city into a giant instrument that played only one sad note. The buildings rose around me like enormous tombs, dark and silent, their windows staring down like thousands of empty eyes. The sun was low in the sky, resting just above the horizon. Its orange light cut through the city in sharp beams, passing between the tall buildings and making the white flowers glow. Long shadows stretched across the road. They grew wider as the sun continued to sink, slowly covering the city in darkness. There should have been noise at this hour. In other summers, children would have been returning home after spending the day with their friends. Parents would have been calling them inside before dinner. Families would have been sitting around tables, talking about work, school, money, and all the small problems that once seemed important. Cars would have filled the roads. People would have shouted at one another from open windows. Dogs would have barked behind fences. Streetlights would have begun flickering on one by one, pushing back the darkness. Now there was only silence. I kicked another patch of flowers, harder this time. The white blooms broke apart beneath my boot. A cloud of petals floated around my legs. I hated them. I hated the way they covered everything. I hated the way they grew from places where people had died. I hated how beautiful they were. The flowers were bright, healthy, and full of life. They did not care that the world around them had ended. In fact, the end of humanity seemed to have made the world perfect for them. I adjusted the straps of my backpack and continued walking. The pack felt heavier with every mile, though there was not much left inside. A few cans of food, 2 bottles of boiled water, some medical supplies, duct tape, and several spare filters for my respirator were all I had managed to keep. I turned into an alley, hoping it would save time, but stopped when I saw a tall metal fence blocking the other end. Someone had covered it with wooden boards during the first weeks of the outbreak. I stared at it in frustration. There had been a time when I would have climbed over without thinking. Now, wearing the thick hazmat suit, every movement was slow and difficult. The plastic pulled against my arms and legs. The respirator made it harder to breathe. Sweat filled the inside of the suit, but I could not open it. I turned around and returned to the street. The city had once driven me mad with noise. I used to complain about traffic horns, engines, distant sirens, construction work, and people talking too loudly on their phones. At night, I would lie in bed, wishing everything would become quiet. I would have traded anything to hear that noise again. I would have given years of my life to hear one traffic jam, one police siren, one argument outside a bar, one child laughing. Instead, I heard only my breathing inside the mask and the sound of the wind moving through dead streets. I turned onto another road and found myself facing the sinking sun. Orange light reflected from shattered windows, forcing me to narrow my eyes. Broken glass covered the sidewalk, crunching beneath my boots. I passed one empty store after another, a bakery with blackened bread still sitting behind the glass counter, a clothing shop filled with dusty mannequins, a small restaurant where chairs remained pushed away from tables. As if the customers had all stood up and fled at once, many storefronts had been broken open and robbed. Shelves had been emptied. Doors hung from their hinges. Several buildings were almost completely filled with plants. Thick vines pushed through windows. White flowers spilled from doorways. Their roots had cracked walls and lifted sections of pavement. The vegetation had grown so quickly that entire rooms disappeared beneath it. I avoided looking directly at the largest clusters. Sometimes bones could be seen inside them. A hand, a skull, a rib cage covered in bright green leaves. The flowers had no trouble growing through clothing, flesh, or bone. I passed a hardware store that had been stripped nearly empty. The shelves that once held respirators, gloves, plastic sheeting, and duct tape were bare. People had quickly learned what they needed to survive. The gun store next door was different. Its front window was broken, but many weapons still hung on the walls. Boxes of ammunition remained stacked behind the counter. I gave a weak laugh. Movies and books had always made guns seem important during the end of the world. When society collapsed, the hero found a weapon and fought back. That was not how this ending worked. You could not shoot pollen. You could not kill seeds with a bullet. You could not threaten flowers into leaving you alone. During the first days, people used guns against one another. They fought over food, bottled water, medicine, masks, and filters. The stores became war zones. People who had been neighbors for years killed one another over supplies that might keep them alive for a few more days. I remembered seeing two men fighting over the last box of respirator cartridges in a supermarket. One of them pulled a handgun. The shot missed its target and struck a woman standing nearby. Everyone screamed and ran. The two men continued fighting. None of them understood yet that the filters would eventually run out anyway. The enemy spread too quickly. At first, the government told everyone to stay indoors. Seal your windows, cover air vents, turn off air conditioning, boil all water. Do not touch exposed plants. Do not remove protective equipment outside. People listened. For a while. Then, electricity failed. Water systems stopped working. Food ran out. Sooner or later, everyone had to leave shelter and search for supplies. Outside was the most dangerous place in the world, but no one could remain inside forever. I reached a familiar intersection and stopped beside a street sign. The metal pole was rusty and covered in dirt. I ran my gloved hand along it until I found an old sticker on the back. The sticker was faded, but the words were still readable. Guess what? Chicken butt. The bright letters were printed above a cartoon chicken, looking over its shoulder with a foolish grin. I smiled. Rose had placed it there when we were teenagers. We had been walking home from school when she pulled the sticker from her pocket. She looked around to make sure no one was watching, then quickly slapped it onto the sign. She had laughed so hard that she could barely breathe. I had told her the joke was stupid. She told me that was why it was funny. For years afterward, we would touch the sticker whenever we passed it. It became one of those small, meaningless things that somehow felt important because it belonged to us. My smile faded. The sun was halfway below the horizon now. I continued walking. No one ever discovered exactly how the outbreak began. Before the radio stations went silent, there were dozens of theories. Some people said the spores came from space. They claimed a meteor had broken apart high in the atmosphere and scattered strange living material across several countries. According to that theory, the seeds had survived the heat of entering Earth's atmosphere and spread through wind and rain. Others blamed governments. People accused the United States, China, Russia, Brazil, and several nations that did not even have the ability to create something like this. Some said it was a weapon. Others said it was an experiment that escaped a laboratory. A few believed a single scientist had created it intentionally, hoping to punish humanity for destroying the environment. Religious groups called it judgment. They said the plants were reclaiming a world that humans had poisoned. The theory, I believed, was connected to the Amazon rainforest. Months before the outbreak, researchers had discovered a new kind of plant deep in an unexplored region of the Amazon. I remembered reading a small article about it. The story was buried beneath political news, celebrity gossip, and reviews of films no one would remember. There was only one photograph, showing a strange white flower with a thick red center. Scientists said the plant grew unusually fast. It released microscopic seeds that could survive inside animals. The article suggested it might have medical uses. Then the news cycle moved on. No one cared. There was always another scandal, another argument, another reason to be angry. That tiny article disappeared beneath the daily noise. Maybe that plant had been the beginning. Maybe someone brought a sample back to a laboratory. Maybe a careless worker breathed in the first seeds. Maybe the outbreak had started with one person coughing in an airport. I would never know. The radio broadcasts ended before anyone gave a real answer. I blinked as sweat ran into my eyes. I wanted to wipe my face, but my hands were trapped inside thick gloves. The hazmat suit had become a prison around my body. Every breath passed through the respirator with a rough, sucking sound. My lungs ached for fresh air. I knew better than to remove the mask. The air looked clean. That was what made it dangerous. You could not see most of the seeds. They floated invisibly around the flowers, carried by wind. They entered through the mouth, nose, eyes, and even the smallest cuts in the skin. Once they entered, there was no cure. I finally reached the street I had been trying to find. At the end of it stood a small florist shop. The painted sign above the door had faded. Several letters were missing. The front windows had shattered, and white vines had grown outward across the sidewalk. Above the shop was a small apartment. I stopped. For weeks, I had imagined reaching this place. I imagined Rose seeing me from the window. I imagined her running downstairs. I imagined holding her, even through layers of plastic. I imagined telling her that everything would be all right, even though I knew it was a lie. I looked up. The last part of me that still believed in hope disappeared. Flowers poured from the apartment window. They hung in long vines, swaying gently in the evening wind. White blossoms covered the wall beneath the window. Among them was a human skeleton. The body rested across the window frame as though it had tried to climb outside. Vines wrapped around the arms, ribs, and legs. The skeleton's empty face pointed toward the street. The flowers growing through the bones were larger and healthier than any others nearby. For several seconds, I refused to believe what I was seeing. Then something small flashed in the sunlight. A necklace hung around the skeleton's neck. The chain moved in the wind. At the end of it was a rose-shaped pendant. I had given it to her on her 18th birthday. A broken laugh escaped from my throat. Then my legs gave out. I fell to my knees. The sound that came from me did not feel human. I screamed Rose's name. The respirator made the scream dull and trapped, but I continued until my throat burned. I leaned forward and struck the pavement with both fists. Again, I hit the ground until pain shot through my hands. Tears filled my eyes and ran down my face. They collected inside the mask, mixing with sweat and saliva. I could barely breathe. I cried without caring how ugly it sounded. I had spent so long trying to reach her. Every mile, every empty building, every night spent hiding in sealed rooms had been for her. Now, she was bones beneath flowers. I collapsed onto my side. The backpack prevented me from lying flat, so I pulled my knees toward my chest. The hazmat suit tightened around my legs. I remembered the last time I had spoken to her. The phones were still working then, though the connection kept breaking. I told her to seal every door and window. I told her to cover the vents with plastic. I told her to turn off the air conditioning. I told her to boil and filter the tap water. Stay inside, I had said. I'm coming to get you. Rose had been frightened, but she tried to hide it. She asked how long it would take. I told her a day, maybe 2. Instead, days became weeks. Gas stations ran dry. The highways filled with abandoned vehicles. My car's tire blew out near the edge of the city, and I could not find a replacement. Phones stopped working. Then the radios went silent. Power failed soon after. I continued on foot. The streets were almost impossible to cross because cars blocked every road. Some vehicles still held bodies inside. Others were empty, their doors left open. I searched for food during the day and slept in sealed rooms at night. I avoided flowers. I avoided people, too. The few survivors I met were often more dangerous than the outbreak. Still, I kept walking because Rose was waiting. At least that was what I told myself. Now I knew she had probably died weeks earlier. Maybe she had done everything I told her. Maybe one tiny opening remained around a window. Maybe a vent had not been sealed properly. Maybe contaminated water entered the pipes. It did not take much. One seed could become thousands. I lifted my hands and noticed the cool draft against my fingers. The gloves had torn. Small cuts crossed the plastic where I had struck the pavement. The tears were not large, but they were enough. I stared at them. At first, fear passed through me. Then it faded. I laughed softly. There was no reason to repair the suit now. The seeds were already inside. Soon, the symptoms would begin. I had seen them many times. First came the itching. A person would scratch at their arms, neck, or chest. Then came a sore throat and dry coughing. The victim would complain that something was moving inside their lungs. Small roots would spread through the soft tissue of the mouth and nose. Seeds would settle in the pores of the skin. Then, the victim's behavior changed. They became desperate to go outside. They wanted sunlight. Even people who understood what was happening could not resist. They tore off masks. They removed protective clothing. They searched for an open area beneath the sky. Then they lay down. The plants drained the body of water and nutrients. Roots spread through muscle and organs. Flowers grew from the mouth, eyes, ears, and open wounds. Within days, only bones remained beneath a thick bed of white blooms. I looked up at Rose's skeleton. I wondered if she had known what was happening. Did she fight the urge to open the window? Did she call my name? Did she believe I had abandoned her? That thought hurt more than anything else. "I came," I whispered. My voice sounded weak inside the mask. "I'm sorry it took so long." The city gave no answer. The sun had almost disappeared. Only a thin red line remained above the horizon. I rolled onto my back. The backpack pressed painfully against my spine, but I did not care. I stared at the darkening sky. Soon I would feel the seeds growing inside me. Soon I would want to remove the suit. I would find a place with sunlight. Maybe I would lie beneath Rose's window. Maybe the same vines would reach me. I did not fear it anymore. I had lost everything before I reached this street. My future was gone. The world we had planned to explore was gone. Before the outbreak, I had been preparing to ask Rose to marry me. I had bought a ring. It was still inside my backpack, hidden in a small box beneath the food and filters. I had imagined taking her somewhere quiet outside the city. I had imagined getting down on one knee and watching her cover her mouth in surprise. I had imagined growing old with her. We had known each other since childhood. She had been my best friend before I understood what love meant. When we were children, we explored empty lots and built forts from broken boards. As teenagers, we walked these same streets and complained about school. As adults, we kept promising that one day we would leave the city and see the world. There had once been so much time. Then the flowers came. Humanity became food for something that did not hate us, and probably never even understood we existed. That was the cruelest part. There was no evil intelligence behind the outbreak, no monster to defeat, no villain to punish, only life growing where other life had ended. I reached up and touched the straps of my respirator. My fingers shook slightly. Some people had called the sickness flower flu. The name sounded almost gentle, as if it were a seasonal illness that would pass. Others called it the rapture. They believed the flowers were taking souls to heaven. Scientists used long medical names during the early broadcasts, but no one remembered them after the hospitals collapsed. I never cared what name people gave it. To me, it was simply the end of the world. I loosened the first strap of the mask. Cool air entered near my cheek. For the first time in weeks, I smelled something other than rubber, sweat, and the stale air inside my suit. The flowers smelled sweet. Of course they did. I removed the second strap. The respirator fell away from my face. I breathed deeply. The evening air filled my lungs. It felt clean, fresh, and wonderful. Somewhere nearby, petals moved across the street. I closed my eyes and pictured Rose as she had been before everything ended. Not the skeleton in the window, not a body feeding flowers. I saw her laughing beside the street sign with the chicken sticker. I saw the rose pendant around her neck. I saw the future we had believed was waiting for us. My throat began to itch. I smiled. "I'm here now," I whispered. Above me, the final edge of the sun disappeared. Darkness settled over the silent city, and the flowers continued to grow. Story 2. The hardest part about waiting was the silence. It was not an ordinary silence. It felt heavy, almost physical. as though it had filled the room and was pressing down on us. Every second stretched longer than it should have. Minutes felt like hours, and the longer we sat there, the more difficult it became to breathe normally. I sat beside my wife Sarah in the clinic's waiting room. The place was painfully clean, but it did not feel welcoming. The walls were a dull shade of cream, the chairs were stiff, and the smell of disinfectant hung in the air. The only sound came from the air conditioner humming somewhere above us. Sarah sat with her hands tightly folded in her lap. Her face looked pale and tired. She kept rubbing her thumb across the edge of her sleeve again and again without seeming to notice. The past 3 years had changed her. They had changed both of us. We had spent almost 3 years trying to have a child. 3 years of doctor visits, tests, medication, procedures, and conversations that always ended with the same empty words. We are sorry. It did not work. You can try again. At first, we had believed every new treatment would be the one that finally helped us. Every time Sarah was late, we allowed ourselves to hope. Every time a doctor suggested a new method, we convinced ourselves that success was close. Then came the negative tests, the failures. The quiet drives home. There were nights when Sarah cried in the bathroom because she did not want me to hear her. There were mornings when I stood alone in the kitchen, staring into a cup of coffee, wondering how long we could keep doing this to ourselves. More than once, we nearly gave up. We talked about accepting a life without children. We tried to imagine growing old together, traveling, working, and building a life that did not include the family we had dreamed about. Sometimes that idea almost felt peaceful. Then, hope would return. It always returned. It was stubborn and cruel. It pulled us back into the same cycle of waiting, hoping, and being disappointed. That hope, or perhaps desperation, was what led us to Dr. Anton Greger. He was a fertility specialist who worked in a quiet part of Boston, near the edge of the old financial district. We had never heard of him through any hospital or well-known medical center. A close friend had told us about him. She had struggled to become pregnant for years, too. Then, somehow, after visiting Dr. Greger, she succeeded. When she told us about him, there had been something strange in her voice. "He's not like other doctors," she had said. She leaned closer to us as though sharing a secret. "He doesn't stop trying. He doesn't fail." Those words stayed in my mind. At the time, they had sounded hopeful. Later, I understood they had been a warning. The clinic was inside an old red brick building surrounded by tall, modern offices. Ivy climbed across the outer walls, and the windows were narrow and dark. They reminded me of eyes that watched without seeing. The building looked as though it had been forgotten while the rest of the city grew around it. It stood alone among the glass towers, quiet and unchanged. There was something fitting about that. Sarah and I had begun to feel like outsiders everywhere we went. Our friends were having children. Our siblings were building families. Every dinner, birthday party, and holiday seemed filled with questions we did not want to answer. When will you two have a baby? Have you tried this, doctor? Maybe you just need to relax. We were tired of explaining, so we made an appointment with Dr. Greger. We did not truly believe he could help us. We simply had nowhere else to go. The door at the back of the waiting room opened with a soft creak. A tall man stepped through. He had gray hair combed neatly away from his face and wore thin glasses with wire frames. The lenses reflected the light in a way that made it difficult to see his eyes. He smiled at us. It was a polite, professional smile. It did not feel warm. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter?" he asked. We stood and followed him into his office. The room looked as old as the outside of the building. The wallpaper had faded, and the wooden furniture was scratched and dark. A large cabinet stood against one wall, filled with old medical books and glass jars. I could not tell what was inside some of them. Dr. Gregor sat behind his desk and folded his hands. He did not waste time with friendly conversation. Tell me what has brought you here. Sarah took a slow breath. We've been trying for 3 years, she said. We've tried medication, hormone treatments, and nothing has worked. Dr. Gregor nodded as though he had heard the same story many times. And now you are here. It was not a question. We were told you specialize in difficult cases, I said. Cases where other treatments have failed. I do. He leaned back in his chair. My methods are unusual, but they are highly effective. I use techniques that go beyond what most clinics are willing to consider. The way he said that made me uncomfortable. What kind of techniques? I asked. Experimental methods. He paused. With experimental medicine, there are always risks. However, I believe the possible success is worth those risks. Sarah's hand found mine. What risks? I asked. Dr. Gregor waved one hand lightly, mostly mild reactions. Nausea, fatigue, discomfort, changes in appetite. He adjusted his glasses. In rare cases, pregnancy may cause more unusual reactions in the body, but nothing that cannot be controlled with proper medical care. The word unusual stayed with me. I should have asked more questions. I should have demanded a clear explanation. Instead, I looked at Sarah. There was fear in her eyes, but there was hope too. She wanted this. I wanted it just as badly. We had already spent years trusting doctors who had failed us. Dr. Gregor was offering us one final chance. What do we need to do? I asked. His smile returned. Leave everything to me. We signed the forms. There were many pages, filled with medical words and legal language. We read some of it, but not all. Dr. Gregor assured us the papers were standard. We believed him. Desperation can make intelligent people careless. The treatment began almost immediately. It was different from everything Sarah had tried before. The injections were stronger and more frequent. Some of the medication came in small glass containers without labels. When I asked what they were, the nurse told me they were part of Dr. Gregor's private formula. Sarah became sick during the first week. She was tired all the time and often woke at night sweating. She complained of strange dreams, but could never remember them clearly. Dr. Gregor said it was normal. Then, within a few weeks, Sarah became pregnant. I still remember the moment we saw the result. Sarah stared at the pregnancy test with both hands covering her mouth. Then she began to cry. I cried too. For the first time in years, those tears came from happiness. We were careful not to celebrate too soon. We had been disappointed many times before. Still, something changed inside our home. Sarah smiled more. She began looking at baby clothes online. She made lists of names. She placed her hand over her stomach, even though there was nothing to feel yet. For the first few months, everything seemed perfect. She felt tired and sick in the mornings, but that was expected. She said she would gladly suffer through it. Then, the rash appeared. One morning, while I was preparing for work, I heard Sarah call my name from the bedroom. There was something in her voice that made me stop immediately. Alex? I hurried in. She was standing in front of the mirror with her shirt raised. What is it? I asked. She turned slightly. At first, I saw nothing strange. Then I noticed the lines beneath her skin. Dark blue veins spread outward from her belly button. They formed a thin pattern across her stomach, almost like the roots of a tree. I moved closer. The veins looked too dark, too clear. "They itch," she said. Her fingers hovered over the skin without touching it. I tried to think of a normal explanation. Pregnancy changed the body. Skin stretched. Blood flow increased. There were dozens of harmless reasons. It may just be part of the pregnancy, I said. "We should call Dr. Greger." The nurse who answered sounded bored. "It is a normal reaction," she said. Her voice was flat, as though she had repeated that sentence many times. "It should disappear." It did not disappear. Over the next several days, the veins became darker and thicker. They spread around Sarah's sides and across her back. Soon, her entire body seemed covered in black lines. The itching grew worse, too. Sarah tried not to scratch, but I often woke to hear her fingernails moving across her skin. Some mornings, there were thin cuts on her stomach where she had scratched in her sleep. Dr. Greger remained calm. "Some patients show stronger reactions than others," he told us. "What exactly is causing this?" I asked. "The medication." "Which medication?" He ignored the question. "It will pass." But the symptoms became worse. Sarah began suffering from sudden sharp pains. At first, the pain remained in her stomach. Then it spread to her legs, arms, and chest. Sometimes she would be walking through the house and suddenly bend over, gripping the edge of a table. Other times, she woke screaming. One night, I found her sitting on the side of the bed with both hands pressed over her stomach. Her eyes were wide and wet. "It feels like something is moving," she whispered. "The baby?" She shook her head slowly. "Not like a baby." I sat beside her. "What does it feel like?" She stared at the dark room, like something crawling. I told her it was normal for a baby to move. I told her the body could create strange feelings during pregnancy. I told her many things I did not believe. Deep inside, I knew something was wrong. Each time I called the clinic, I received the same answers. "Everything is normal. Trust the treatment. Dr. Greger knows what he is doing." We were already committed. The pregnancy was moving forward, and we were afraid that stopping the treatment might harm the baby. About 5 months into the pregnancy, Sarah woke me in the middle of the night. She was breathing quickly. When I opened my eyes, she was standing in front of the full-length mirror. Moonlight passed through the curtains and fell across her body. Her stomach had grown far too large. She looked closer to the end of a normal pregnancy than the middle. The veins beneath her skin had become thick black cords. Her skin looked almost transparent. I could see movement beneath it, not the soft kick of a baby. Something moved across her stomach from one side to the other, creating a long raised line. Sarah pressed one hand against her belly. "Alex," she whispered. Her voice sounded close to breaking. "There is something else inside me." I climbed out of bed. "What do you mean?" "It isn't only the baby." Her entire body trembled. "I can feel something moving in a different way. It doesn't feel right." I walked to her and put my arms around her shoulders. Her skin was cold and damp. "We're going to the clinic tomorrow," I said. "We will make them examine you properly." She nodded, but I could feel how afraid she was. That night, I did not sleep. I sat beside her and watched her breathe. Sometimes her stomach moved beneath the blankets. Each time it did, my heart began beating faster. The following morning, I called the clinic and demanded an appointment. I refused to let them delay us. Sarah could barely walk by then. I helped her into the car and drove across the city. Dr. Gregor was waiting when we arrived. He looked exactly as he always did. Calm, clean, in control. He took us into a private examination room. The room smelled of metal and disinfectant. Medical machines stood near the walls, but many looked older than anything I had seen in a modern hospital. "We will perform several tests," he said. Sarah lowered herself carefully onto the examination table. Everything is progressing as expected. Something inside me broke. "Expected?" I shouted. My voice echoed through the room. "Look at her. She's in pain. Her body is changing. She can barely walk." Dr. Gregor did not react. "I understand your concern." "No, you don't." I stepped closer to him. "You've been lying to us since the beginning." His expression changed slightly. It was only a small movement around his mouth, but I saw it. "I want the truth," I said. "What did you give her?" He looked at Sarah. She lay on the table with her eyes closed, breathing in shallow gasps. "There are things you do not understand," he said. "Then explain them." The treatment was not designed only to create a pregnancy. A cold feeling entered my chest. "What does that mean?" Dr. Gregor adjusted his glasses. "My work is about progress. Evolution, the future of the human body." I stared at him. "What have you done?" He stepped closer and lowered his voice. "We are close to something extraordinary. Your child is the first successful step." My mind struggled to understand his words. "You used us for an experiment?" He did not deny it. Instead, he smiled. "Your child is more than a child. It is a new form of life." My breathing became difficult. "You put something inside my wife." "Not something," he said. "Someone, you're insane." History often calls visionaries insane. You're killing her. Her body is performing exactly as required. The door opened. 2 nurses entered. They moved towards Sarah without speaking. One began attaching wires to her chest while the other prepared a syringe. I rushed forward. "Get away from her." One nurse grabbed my arm. Her grip was much stronger than I expected. "Sir, step back." I tried to pull free. "Let me go." Dr. Gregor watched from the corner of the room. "You must trust the process. I trusted you once." The nurse tightened her grip. I struggled harder. Then I felt a sharp pain in my arm. I turned and saw a needle being pulled from my skin. The room immediately began to move. My arms felt heavy. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. I tried to stay awake. I heard Sarah call my name. Then darkness covered everything. When I woke, my head felt heavy, and my mouth was dry. At first, I could not remember where I was. Then I tried to move. Leather straps held my wrists and ankles to a metal chair. Panic rushed through me. Across the room, Sarah lay on the examination table. The lights were low. Machines surrounded her, filling the room with soft beeping sounds. The black veins had spread across her neck and face. Her stomach had grown even larger. It looked impossible. The skin was stretched so tightly that I feared it would tear. Dr. Gregor stood beside her. The nurses were gone. He watched her with the quiet focus of a scientist studying an animal. "She is entering the final stage," he said. My voice came out weak. "What final stage?" "The birth." I pulled against the restraints. "You can't do this. It is already happening. You are going to kill her." Dr. Gregor looked at me. "She is a vessel." The words felt like a knife. "She is my wife. She is necessary." Tears filled my eyes. I had brought her there. I had signed the forms. I had ignored every warning because I wanted a child. Now, she was dying because of me. Sarah's body suddenly convulsed. Her back rose off the table. A scream tore from her throat. The machines began beeping faster. Dr. Greger checked the screens. It has begun. Sarah's stomach changed shape. Something pushed outward from inside her. The skin stretched in one place, then another. I could see the outline of a hand. It was too large. The fingers were too long. "Please," I whispered. Dr. Greger did not look at me. "Stop this." He leaned closer to Sarah, watching with excitement. Her screams became louder. Then, without warning, they stopped. The room became still. The machines continued beeping. Sarah lay flat on the table, barely breathing. For a moment, I thought she was dead. Then her stomach moved again. Something pressed against the skin from inside. A hand. An arm. A shape that could not belong to a normal baby. Dr. Greger stepped forward. His eyes shone behind his glasses. "This is it," he whispered. Sarah's back arched again. There was a wet, tearing sound. Her stomach opened. Blood spread across the table. Something pushed its way out of her. At first, I could only see twisted limbs covered in blood. Then it pulled itself free. It fell onto the table beside her and slowly stood. It had the shape of a child. But it was not human. Its arms and legs were too long and thin. Its skin was pale gray and almost transparent. Black veins covered its body, glowing faintly beneath the surface. Its head was too large. Its eyes were completely black. There were no white areas, no pupils. Only darkness. It moved in short, unnatural jerks, as though invisible strings controlled its body. Blood dripped from its hands and feet. It turned toward me. The moment its eyes met mine, I felt something touch my mind. Not physically. Something entered my thoughts. I felt memories rising inside me. Childhood memories. Fear, shame, sadness, the creature watched all of it. Then it opened its mouth. No sound came out. Dr. Greger stepped toward it with both hands raised. Magnificent. His voice shook with emotion. "Do you see, Alex? This is the future. A life beyond humanity." I stared at the thing. My child. That was what he called it. But nothing about it belonged to Sarah or me. "This isn't our child," I whispered. Dr. Greger smiled. "It is the first of its kind." The creature tilted its head. Then it smiled. It was not the smile of a baby. It was slow and knowing. It looked as though it understood exactly what had happened. Then it turned toward Sarah. Her body lay still. The creature reached down and touched her face with one long finger. "No," I said. My voice was barely audible. "Get away from her." Dr. Greger continued watching. There is still much to learn. My vision began to blur again. The drug remained inside my body. The last thing I remember was the creature looking back at me. Its black eyes seemed pleased. When I woke again, I was in a hospital. The room was bright and modern. A nurse stood beside my bed. I tried to sit up, but pain moved through my body. "Where is Sarah?" I asked. The nurse looked confused. "Who?" "My wife. She checked the chart. You were brought here alone. What about the clinic?" "What clinic?" Dr. Greger, she called a doctor. They asked me questions. They said I had been found unconscious in my apartment. They said there had been no sign of Sarah. No blood. No medical equipment. No evidence that she had ever been pregnant. I demanded that they contact Dr. Greger's clinic. There was no clinic. The address led to an empty building that had supposedly been closed for years. There was no Dr. Anton Greger listed in any medical records. There were no nurses, no treatment records, no forms, nothing. It was as though the entire experience had never happened. But Sarah was gone. I spent months searching for her. I contacted hospitals, police departments, private investigators, and medical boards. I went back to the old building. The windows were boarded. Dust covered the floor. There was no examination room, no waiting area, no equipment, only empty rooms. I tried to find the friend who had recommended Dr. Greger. She had disappeared too. Her phone number no longer worked. Her apartment was empty. Her neighbors said they had not seen her in months. Every lead ended the same way. Nothing. Eventually, people stopped believing me. The police thought Sarah had left me. Some doctors believed I had imagined the pregnancy. Others thought I had harmed her and created the story to hide what I had done. I began doubting my own memories. Then I would close my eyes and see the creature standing beside her body. I knew it was real. I left Boston. I could not stay in a city filled with reminders. I moved far away and rented a small apartment in another state. I tried to begin again, but there is no beginning after something like that. Every night I dream of Sarah. I see her lying on the table. I hear her screaming my name. I see her stomach opening. Then I see the child, the thing that came from her. Sometimes, in the dream, it is still small. Other times, it has grown tall. Each time, it looks more human. That frightens me more than its original form. The worst part is knowing it is still somewhere in the world. Growing, learning, changing. Dr. Greger said it was only the beginning. I often wonder how many other couples visited his clinic. How many desperate people signed those forms. How many women carried something that was not human. Perhaps the creatures are still hidden. Perhaps they look like children now. Perhaps they are living among families who believe their treatments were successful. Sometimes I think I see one. A child watching me too carefully from across a grocery store. A pale teenager standing beneath a streetlight. A stranger with eyes that look black for 1 second before becoming normal again. Maybe fear has damaged my mind. Maybe I am seeing monsters everywhere because I failed to protect the person I loved. But last week, I received an envelope. There was no return address. Inside was a photograph. It showed a young boy standing in front of a brick building. He looked about 6 years old. His skin was pale. His arms seemed slightly too long. Behind him stood Dr. Greger. Neither of them smiled. On the back of the photograph, someone had written a single sentence. He is growing well. Beneath that was another line. The next generation is almost ready. I burned the photograph. It did not matter. I still see the boy whenever I close my eyes. He had Sarah's mouth and my face. Story 3. Art was never something I wanted to do. It was part of my family, of course. It had been for generations. My grandfather painted. My father painted. His father had painted before him, and according to the stories I grew up hearing, the same talent reached even further back through our bloodline. Almost every man on my father's side of the family had been given some kind of artistic gift. Almost every man except me. I could not draw a straight line without making it look wrong. My stick figures looked like they had been hit by a car. I never understood how anyone could mess up something as simple as a line, but somehow I always managed it. My father found this deeply disappointing. He was brilliant with oil pastels. He could create light texture, movement, and emotion with nothing more than a few colored sticks in his fingers. His work was detailed and traditional, which meant it did not receive much attention during a time when abstract art had become more popular. People wanted shapes, splashes, confusion, and statements they could pretend to understand. My father painted things that were beautiful. Because of that, much of his work went ignored. His greatest painting was called Inanimata Oculis. It showed a woman standing in the middle of a wide lavender field at sunset. The sky behind her burned with red, orange, and gold. The flowers around her stretched far into the distance, filling the entire lower half of the picture with deep shades of violet and purple. The woman wore a long blue dress that moved in the wind. Everything about her looked peaceful, everything except her eyes. Her eyes were completely black, not dark brown, not shadowed. Black. The black was so deep that it did not seem like paint. It looked like two empty holes cut into the canvas. The rest of the painting was made with oil pastel, but the eyes seemed to have been filled with something else. Something thicker, something that swallowed light. Some people found the painting beautiful. Others refused to stand near it for more than a few seconds. A few claimed that the woman watched them as they moved around the room. Only a small number admitted that the painting frightened them. I used to stand in front of it for long periods when I was young. I admired the colors, I admired the field and the sky, but I always returned to the eyes. One day, I finally asked my father why he had painted them that way. He did not look at me when he answered. His voice was rough and quiet. One does not draw what one does not see. That was all he said. I never asked him again. My grandfather was different from my father. He worked mostly with watercolor and acrylic paint. His pictures were often bright, calm, and full of life. He painted fields after rain, quiet streets at sunrise, forests in autumn, and distant cities glowing beneath clear skies. One of his most famous works was called Neo New York in the Rain. He painted it in the early 1970s, but it showed New York City far in the future. The streets were filled with smooth cars, glowing signs, enormous glass towers, and small handheld computers. What made the painting so strange was how modern it looked. Artists and filmmakers of that time usually imagined the future as heavy, mechanical, and covered in thick cables. My grandfather painted something cleaner and more advanced. Years later, when technology began to resemble some of the things he had imagined, people started calling the painting visionary. He never seemed proud of that. Whenever someone praised it, he only smiled, politely, and changed the subject. His greatest work was nothing like the others. It was called Regnum Spirituum, the Kingdom of Spirits. There was no color in it. The entire painting was made from black, white, and different shades of gray. It showed a wide, empty plain beneath a pale sky. The grass was thin and dying. Small plants struggled to rise from the cracked earth, but every leaf was bent and withered. Far in the distance, dark shapes moved through the fog. Some people called them ghosts. Others called them shadows. I thought they looked like human beings who had forgotten how to be human. Their bodies were too long in some places and too narrow in others. Their arms hung toward the ground. Their heads leaned at painful angles. A few appeared to be crawling. None had faces. The longer you looked, the more figures you noticed. Some stood in the grass. Some floated above it. Others seemed to be trapped beneath the soil, their hands pressing upward as if trying to break through. The painting was considered my grandfather's finest work, but nobody wanted it. People became sick when they looked at it for too long. Some felt dizzy. Others complained of headaches or a sudden taste of metal in their mouths. One buyer vomited after standing in front of it for less than a minute. After that, the family stopped trying to sell it. It became less of a masterpiece and more of a curse. Everyone wanted it hidden away. Everyone except me. I was the one person in the family who loved it. It disturbed me, but I did not think that was a bad thing. Horror had always interested me. Some of my relatives had made much more violent pieces. My uncle once built a sculpture from rusted nails and screws collected from an abandoned house where a murder and suicide had supposedly taken place. The sculpture showed a man being torn out of reality and dragged into a pit. Compared to that, my grandfather's painting seemed quiet. Sad, perhaps, but not evil. I liked the mystery of it. I wanted to understand who the figures were and where they were going. I wondered whether they were dead, trapped, or waiting. My grandfather knew I was fascinated by the painting. I asked him several times if I could have it. He always refused. He never explained why. When he died, I learned that he had left it to me in his will. I was shocked. I had expected the family to donate it to a museum, lock it in storage, or burn it. Instead, it became mine. I was happier than I should have been. My wife, Sarah, was not. The first time she saw the painting in our home, she stood several feet away and folded her arms. "You are not putting that in the bedroom," she said. I wasn't planning to. Or the living room. I wasn't planning to do that either. She looked at the figures in the gray field. "Why would he leave this to you?" "Because I liked it." That does not answer the question. I hung it in my study. Sarah hated entering that room after dark, but she agreed to leave the painting there as long as I did not move it anywhere else. At the time, I was struggling as a writer. Writing had always been my talent. I could not paint or draw, but I could create worlds with words. I wrote my first short novel when I was 14. It was not very good, but it was complete, and that had meant something to me. While my father and relatives worked with canvas, clay, paint, and metal, I worked with language. Still, my family never treated writing as real art. To them, I was the one who had failed to inherit the gift. I had spent years trying to prove them wrong. I wrote stories, sent them to publishers, and collected rejection letters. My work was not terrible, but it was never good enough. That changed after I hung Regnum Spiritum in my study. At first, I only looked at it for inspiration. I would sit at my desk, struggle with a sentence, and then glance toward the painting. Sometimes I lost track of time. I would stare at the gray plain and imagine the wind moving through the dying grass. I would wonder where the figures had come from. Then I would look back at my computer. An hour would have passed. Pages of writing would be waiting on the screen. The words were mine, yet I could not remember typing them. The stories were better than anything I had written before. The sentences flowed naturally. The characters felt alive. The descriptions were clear and powerful. It was as though someone else had guided my hands. At first, I thought the painting helped me focus. Then, I began to feel my grandfather's hand resting on my shoulder. It was not a real hand, not exactly. It was more like pressure. A cold weight would settle beside my neck whenever I began to write. The feeling should have frightened me, but it did not. It felt comforting. I imagined my grandfather standing behind me, helping me create something beautiful. He had found a way to give me the family gift. Not through paint, through words. With the painting in front of me and that invisible hand on my shoulder, I wrote constantly. stories came faster than I could finish them. My first successful novel was called Frontier 20. The next was Beyond the Deep Cold Black. Both became popular. Readers loved the strange worlds, the distant planets, and the vast creatures I described. Publishers who had once ignored me began calling. My books sold thousands, then hundreds of thousands of copies. For the first time in my life, my parents spoke proudly about my work. I was no longer the useless son who could not paint. I had added something to the family name. The painting was always at the center of it. My grandfather's hand guided me. At least I believed it was his hand. As the years passed, the worlds I saw became larger. The gray plane in the painting opened into places no human mind should have been able to imagine. I saw gods living at the centers of universes. Their bodies stretched through darkness, in shapes too large to understand. Their movements bent galaxies. Their thoughts became storms. They laughed. They cried. They fought. They betrayed one another. Their emotions changed the structure of creation. When one of them cast a stone, planets broke apart. When one shed a tear, a new star appeared. When one bled, the blood formed a universe filled with living things. Their lives were like ours, but the results of their actions were beyond anything we could understand. A human child might disturb an ant colony by kicking dirt into it. These beings began interplanetary wars with a careless thought. I watched them make promises and break them. I watched them create entire civilizations and forget about them. I watched worlds grow beneath their attention and die when they looked away. My grandfather showed me these things. He became my guide across the darkness. In my mind, I called him my ferryman. His hand remained on my shoulder, cold and patient. I wrote what he showed me. The books became more successful. I traveled. I attended parties. I stayed in expensive hotels. People asked for my autograph. Universities invited me to speak about creativity. Nobody knew that I could no longer write without the painting. Nobody knew that before every novel, I had to sit in front of Regnum Spiritum and wait for the cold hand to return. One summer, Sarah and I took a vacation to the American West. We visited Utah and saw the Great Silent Wall, a massive mountain formation rising above the land. It was beautiful, but something about it made me uneasy. The mountain looked ancient in a way that ordinary mountains did not. It seemed less like a natural formation and more like something built to hide a secret. I stood there for a long time, waiting for the visions to come. They did not. For the first time in years, my mind was quiet. Sarah was happy during the trip. She said it was the first vacation we had taken where I was truly present. I had not brought the painting. I had not written a single sentence. We stayed in good hotels, ate at expensive restaurants, and attended several parties. For a while, I felt normal. When we returned home, Sarah and I went directly to bed. That night was one of the happiest nights of our marriage. We did not dream about gods, dying worlds, or creatures hidden between stars. We dreamed about each other. The next morning, I woke in panic. At first, I did not understand why. Then, I realized I could not remember the names of my books. I knew I had written them. I knew people had read them. But the titles were gone. It was more than forgetting. The books no longer felt real. I went to the shelves in my study and pulled down one of my novels. I stared at the cover. The title had disappeared. There was only smooth leather. Later, Sarah told me the book was The Overview Effect. At the time, I saw nothing. I opened it. The pages were filled with words, but they did not feel like mine. I recognized the language, but not the mind behind it. It was like reading the work of a stranger. I spent the entire day sitting in front of the painting. I waited for my grandfather's hand. It did not come. I stared into the gray field until my eyes hurt. I begged silently for the visions to return. Nothing happened. The figures in the painting seemed farther away than before. The more I focused on them, the more distant they became. Then I understood. I had been unfaithful. I had gone away. I had enjoyed a life without the painting. I had spent a night thinking only of Sarah. I had forgotten him. That was the word that appeared in my mind. Him, not my grandfather. Something else. Something greater. Something I had offended. I needed to atone. That night, I sat alone in my study. The painting hung in front of me. I thought about my life. I remembered being a child surrounded by talented people. I remembered my father looking at my drawings with disappointment. When I was 10, he forced me to work small jobs to help pay for my food. He said that if I could not contribute beauty to the family, I needed to contribute something else. I remembered standing in a restaurant kitchen, washing dishes while other children played outside. I remembered my first kiss. I remembered my first broken heart. I remembered marrying Sarah. I remembered the pride in her eyes when my first book was published. Then I thought about how small all of it was. A single human life meant nothing compared to the universes I had seen. My joy meant nothing. My pain meant nothing. My marriage, my childhood, my success, and my name were all tiny things beneath the movement of gods. My thoughts drifted outward. The room disappeared. The painting opened. I saw the spaces between stars. I saw dead galaxies and unborn suns. I saw civilizations so advanced that humanity looked like insects beside them. I watched beings build cities around black holes. I saw machines that could move time. I saw minds living inside light. The hand returned to my shoulder. This time it did not feel kind. It felt thin. The fingers were too long. The nails pressed through my shirt. I tried to pull away, but my body remained still. The hand tightened. Something leaned close behind me. I felt cold breath near my ear. Then the words began. They poured through my mind faster than I could understand. My hands moved across the keyboard. I wrote until morning. When I woke from the trance, a complete novel filled the screen. It was the greatest thing I had ever written. It was also the first time I understood that the presence was not my grandfather. My grandfather had not been guiding me. Something had been using his shape. It had given me visions in exchange for pieces of myself. The hand on my shoulder no longer felt protective. It felt hungry. I imagined teeth pressing into my thoughts. I could feel something chewing through memories, names, and feelings. It fed while I wrote. I should have stopped. I did not. The novel was published. It became my most successful book. After that, my condition slowly grew worse. At first, the changes were small. I developed a stutter. Words disappeared while I spoke. I would begin a sentence during a meeting with an editor and forget what the sentence meant halfway through. Sometimes my tongue moved, but the wrong sound came out. People laughed nervously. I blamed stress. I knew better. The creature was punishing me. It had given me my gift again, but the gift now had a price. Every book cost something. One took my ability to remember certain colors. Another took the face of my first girlfriend. I could remember that I had loved her, but when I imagined her, there was only a blank shape. One story took the memory of my mother's voice. Another took the smell of rain. Each time I finished a book, something disappeared. I continued writing. I told myself I had no choice. Without the visions, I was nothing. Without the books, my family would remember me as a failure. The creature understood this. It knew exactly how much I feared becoming ordinary. The night before everything ended, I received one final vision. I saw the birth of a star. It appeared in complete darkness. At first, there was only a small point of light. Then it expanded, throwing out colors no human eye had ever seen. The colors did not have names. Some seemed bright and dark at the same time. Others appeared to move backward through space. Around the star, a galaxy formed. Dust gathered. Worlds appeared. Oceans filled. Life began. The sight was so beautiful that I cried. I knew I could never describe it properly. Human words would only ruin it. The vision belonged to minds greater than ours. It was not meant to be shared. When I woke the next morning, Sarah was shaking my shoulder. "Honey," she said. "Honey, wake up." I opened my eyes. She looked terrified. "Are you okay?" she asked. "You've been whispering all morning." I heard the words. Then she said my name. At least I knew she did. Her mouth formed it. My ears heard a sound. My mind could not understand it. There was an empty space where my name should have been. I stared at her. "What did you call me?" She repeated it. Again, I heard nothing I recognized. It was a word without meaning, a sound belonging to someone else. Tears filled my eyes. The hand rested on my shoulder. Slowly, it slid away. Each finger moved one at a time. The touch left behind a terrible coldness. The visions disappeared with it. The stars were gone. The gods were gone. The worlds, the galaxies, and the endless dark spaces vanished. My mind became empty. The creature had taken everything. My talent, my memories, my name. It had taken my ability to trust my own senses. If I could not recognize my name when my wife spoke it, how could I trust anything I heard? How could I know that her voice was real? How could I know that she was real? I retreated inside myself. The room became distant. Sarah's face blurred. Her voice faded into meaningless noise. I searched through every corner of my mind. I found memories of gods. I found images of collapsing stars. I found worlds made of glass and cities built inside living creatures. I found oceans floating in space. I found beings that had existed before time, but I could not find my name. The Father was there. That is what I called him. The Father watched me search. He watched me suffer. He did not help. He remained near, silent and cruel. Without a name, I understood that I no longer existed. A person without a name is not a person. A person without a past is only a shape. Time passed. Perhaps hours, perhaps years, perhaps ages. Then I found myself standing somewhere else. The world around me had no color. Everything was black, white, and gray. The sky was pale and empty. The ground stretched endlessly in every direction. The grass struggled to grow from the dead soil, but each blade was weak and dying. Figures moved in the distance. Some walked, some crawled, some pressed their hands upward from beneath the earth. None had faces. I knew this place. I had stared at it for years. I stood inside Regnum Spiritum, the kingdom of spirits. A cold hand rested on my shoulder. This time I did not pretend it belonged to my grandfather. The father leaned close. I could not see his face. I could not hear his voice. But I understood what he wanted. The painting had never shown the dead. It had shown the artists. My grandfather was there somewhere in the fog. My father would come one day. Every man in my family who had been given the gift had eventually entered this place. The art was not inherited. It was borrowed. The talent was only bait. And now, without a name, without a voice, and without anything left to call my own, I joined the others wandering across the dying plain. Story 4. The night air in Manhattan cut through my clothes like 1,000 small needles. Winter had turned the city hard and bitter, covering the streets in dirty snow and making every breath burn inside my lungs. The towers above me disappeared into low clouds, their windows glowing like distant stars. Taxis rushed past at the end of the block, horns blaring, but inside the narrow alley. The city felt far away. The place smelled of rotting trash, urine, wet brick, and something worse. Death. I knew that smell. It was his signature. Vincent Draven had been leaving it behind for years. I stood in the darkness behind a metal dumpster, watching the mouth of the alley. My hands were cold even inside my gloves, but I kept them still. The Glock beneath my jacket rested heavily against my ribs. I had checked the magazine 3 times before leaving home. The bullets were not normal. Each one had been filled with a mixture of silver dust, blessed salt, and dried vervain. I did not know which part would hurt him most. I only needed one of them to slow him down. I had been hunting Draven for nearly 4 years. In that time, he had murdered at least 23 people that I knew of. There were probably more. Some bodies were found in alleys, hotel rooms, abandoned buildings, or parked cars. Others simply vanished. The police treated the killings like separate crimes. A homeless woman found dead beneath a bridge. A college student who never returned from a party. A young model discovered in an empty apartment. A bartender left behind a nightclub. Different neighborhoods, different lives, different families. But the bodies shared the same signs. 2 small wounds near the neck. Almost no blood left inside them. No fingerprints. No useful security footage. The detectives blamed drugs, serial killers, human trafficking, or simple bad luck. Whenever someone suggested anything impossible, they laughed. I had laughed once too. Then, Draven killed my sister. Lexi had been 17. She was the kind of person who trusted everyone. She believed that strangers were usually good, that people meant what they said, and that the world was safer than it really was. She laughed too loudly, sang badly in the shower, and stole my jackets without asking. She wanted to study photography. She took pictures of everything: rain on windows, stray cats, old buildings, people sitting alone on trains. She said every person had a story written on their face. 4 years ago, she attended a birthday party in Lower Manhattan. She sent me a message shortly after midnight. Some rich guy bought everyone drinks. He is kind of strange, but he knows the owner. That was the last message she ever sent. Her body was found the next morning beside a pile of black garbage bags. The police told my parents she had probably left the party with a stranger. They suggested drugs might have been involved. One detective even said teenagers sometimes made dangerous choices. My mother broke down. My father stopped speaking. I wanted someone to blame. Then I found the photographs. Lexi's camera had been recovered from the alley, but the police had not looked closely at the final images. Most were dark and blurred. There were pictures of the party, her friends, glasses on a table, and lights reflected in mirrors. Then there was a man. Tall, dark hair, expensive suit, blue eyes. In the first photograph, he was standing near the bar. In the next, he was looking directly at Lexi. In the final clear image, he was smiling. Vincent Draven. I spent months learning everything about him. On paper, he was perfect. He worked for a powerful investment company on Wall Street. He lived in a luxury apartment overlooking the river. He attended charity events, political dinners, private clubs, and expensive parties. Newspapers described him as intelligent, generous, and charming. He had no criminal record, no family, no clear history before the age of 30. That last part bothered me. The deeper I searched, the stranger things became. Draven appeared in a company photograph from 1998, looking exactly the same. I found another picture from a charity event in 1976. Same face, same smile, same sharp eyes. Then I discovered a black and white photograph from 1932. He was standing outside a hotel in London. He had not aged. At first, I thought the pictures were fake or that the men were relatives. I did not want to believe the obvious answer. Then I spoke with an old woman named Margaret Hale. Her daughter had vanished in 1987 after meeting a man at a nightclub. Margaret had spent decades searching for him. When I showed her Draven's photograph, she started shaking. "That's him," she whispered. "He looked exactly like that." She gave me a box of notes, old newspaper clippings, and photographs collected over 30 years. After that, there was no doubt. Vincent Draven was not human. The word vampire sounded ridiculous when spoken aloud. It belonged in old books, cheap movies, and childish Halloween stories. It did not belong in Manhattan. It did not belong inside glass office buildings or private restaurants. But Draven did not live in shadows or sleep inside a coffin. He walked among people. He wore tailored suits, drank expensive wine, and smiled for cameras. He shook hands with politicians and donated money to hospitals. He sat on company boards and controlled millions of dollars. By day, he was a successful businessman. By night, he hunted. His money protected him almost as well as his strength did. Witnesses were paid. Security recordings disappeared. Detectives were transferred. Journalists lost interest. People close to him understood that asking questions could destroy their careers. Some probably knew what he was. Most simply chose not to care. I did not have that luxury. After Lexi's death, I gave up almost everything. I left my job. I stopped answering friends. I turned my apartment into a place for research and training. Maps covered the walls. Photographs of victims surrounded Draven's face. Red lines connected clubs, restaurants, offices, and buildings where bodies had been discovered. I read every vampire legend I could find. Most were useless. Garlic did nothing. Crosses worked only if the person holding them truly believed. Sunlight weakened older vampires, but did not always kill them. Silver burned. Fire destroyed. A wooden stake through the heart could kill one, but only if it was pushed deep enough. I learned to fight from anyone willing to teach me. Boxing, knife defense, grappling, firearms. I trained until my hands split open and my body was covered in bruises. The instructors thought I was preparing for a dangerous job. They never knew the truth. For weeks, I followed Draven. He left his office around 7 each evening, but he rarely went directly home. Some nights he attended private dinners. Other nights he sat in hotel bars, watching people over the rim of a glass he never seemed to drink from. He preferred young women, usually blondes, usually alone. He chose women who were new to the city or too polite to distrust a wealthy stranger. He spoke softly, listened carefully, and made them feel important. I watched him approach one woman in a hotel lobby. Within 20 minutes, she was laughing at everything he said. I almost attacked him then. But there were cameras, guards, and too many people. If I failed, he would disappear. I needed patience. Tonight, I had followed him from a rooftop bar in Midtown. The young woman with him could not have been older than 20. She wore a short black dress and heels that made her walk carefully across the icy pavement. She looked nervous, but excited. Draven stayed close beside her, one hand resting lightly against her lower back. From a distance, they looked like a couple leaving a party. No one gave them a second glance. I followed half a block behind. The woman laughed at something he said. The sound was too loud and uncertain. She wanted him to think she was comfortable. Draven leaned closer and whispered near her ear. She smiled. I wondered what he had told Lexi. Had he promised to show her something? Had he offered her a ride? Had she known she was in danger before the end? The questions had lived inside me for 4 years. Tonight, I would finally make him answer for them. Draven guided the woman away from the bright street and toward the alley. She hesitated at the entrance. "There's a private door back here," he told her. His voice was calm and warm. She looked behind them. "Are you sure?" "Trust me." Those 2 words almost made me step from hiding immediately. Trust me. The woman followed him. I moved after them, staying close to the wall. The alley narrowed between 2 old buildings. Pipes ran along the brick, and weak light came from a broken lamp above a back door. Draven stopped near the far end. The woman looked around. "I don't see any door." His smile changed. It became smaller, colder. "There isn't one." She laughed nervously. "What?" Draven grabbed her throat. Her back slammed against the brick wall. She made a small, choking sound and clawed at his hand. He lifted her feet from the ground as if she weighed nothing. His face moved closer to her neck. I stepped from the shadows and raised my pistol. "Let her go, Draven." He froze. Slowly, he turned his head toward me. Those sharp blue eyes narrowed. Up close, they looked almost too clear. No warmth lived behind them. "Who the hell are you?" he asked. His voice was smooth, but something dangerous moved beneath it. I walked closer, keeping the gun aimed at his chest. "I'm your death." For a second, he only stared. Then, he laughed. It was not loud. It was the quiet, amused laugh of someone who had never believed he could be threatened. Draven released the woman. She fell to the ground, coughing and holding her throat. "Run," I told her. She looked between us, confused and terrified. "Run now." She stumbled to her feet and rushed toward the street. One of her shoes came off, but she did not stop to retrieve it. Draven watched her go. Then he looked at me. "You have made a serious mistake. I have been waiting 4 years to make it." I pulled the trigger. The suppressor reduced the shot to a hard snap. The bullet struck his side. Draven staggered and hit the wall. Thick black blood ran through his white shirt. For one hopeful second, I thought the bullet had done more damage than expected. Then he straightened. He looked down at the wound and touched the blood with 2 fingers. His eyes returned to me. "You put silver in the bullet." And a few other things. His smile disappeared. The human shape around him began to change. At first, his shoulders twisted. Then his spine bent sharply. Bones cracked beneath his skin. His fingers stretched longer as dark claws pushed through the tips. His jaw widened, and the skin around his mouth split. I took a step back. I had known he was a monster. Knowing did not prepare me for seeing it. His expensive suit tore across the shoulders. Pale flesh appeared beneath it, stretched tightly across a thin, unnatural frame. His face pulled backward until it looked like a skull covered in wet skin. His blue eyes turned gold. They glowed in the dark like burning coins. His teeth lengthened into jagged points. Black venom dripped from them and struck the pavement with a soft hiss. The thing that had worn Vincent Draven's face looked at me. Then it grinned. "Cute trick," he snarled. He moved. I barely saw him cross the distance. I fired a second shot. The gun clicked. Jammed, damn it. I tried to clear the weapon, but he was already on me. Draven struck my chest with one hand. The force lifted me from my feet and threw me into the wall. My head hit the brick. Light flashed behind my eyes. Before I could fall, his claws caught my jacket and held me upright. "You followed me," he said. His breath smelled like old blood. "For weeks. I tried to reach the knife in my pocket." He slammed me against the wall again. Pain tore through my back. "You thought I did not notice?" His claws cut through the front of my jacket and scraped across my skin. Warm blood spread over my shirt. "I knew you were there," he continued. "I wanted to see how long you would continue." I drove my knee toward his stomach. It felt like striking stone. He laughed. "Was this your plan? One gun and a few special bullets?" I spat blood into his face. His smile vanished. He threw me across the alley. I hit the side of a dumpster and fell onto the wet pavement. My pistol slipped from my hand. Draven moved toward me slowly now. He no longer needed speed. He wanted me to understand that I had failed. I pushed myself onto one knee. My body screamed in pain. "Who was she?" he asked. I looked up. "What?" "The person I killed." His claws scraped along the brick wall as he walked. "You have the look. Grief, obsession, hatred." He smiled again. "I have seen it many times. Lexi, the name left my mouth like a blade." He stopped. "My sister, 17 years old. You killed her 4 years ago." Draven appeared to think. Then he shrugged. "I do not remember her." The words hurt more than his claws. My sister had been everything to my family. To him, she was not even a memory. "She had a camera," I said. "Blonde hair. Blue jacket." His golden eyes brightened slightly. "Ah," he remembered. That made it worse. "She cried," he said. Rage burned through the pain. Draven tilted his head. "She begged me to let her go." "Most of them do." I forced myself to stand. "You should not have said that." He laughed. "You are already dead." "No," my hand moved toward my belt. "I'm not." Draven lunged. I pulled the sharpened wooden stake free. I had made it from white oak and soaked it in holy water for 7 days. Thin silver wire had been wrapped around the base to strengthen the grip. Draven reached for my throat. I ducked beneath his arm and drove the stake into his chest. The point struck bone. He screamed. The sound shook the alley and seemed to pass through my entire body. Windows above us rattled. Somewhere, a car alarm began to cry. Draven struck me across the face. One claw opened my cheek. I held on to the stake. He grabbed my arm and squeezed. Bones shifted painfully beneath his fingers. I drove the stake harder. It moved through his ribs. Black blood poured over my hands. Draven roared and threw me against the wall, but I refused to release the weapon. My shoulder nearly came out of place. His claws tore into my left arm. Pain exploded from my wrist to my shoulder. I screamed but kept pushing. "You cannot kill me," he snarled. His face was inches from mine. Venom dripped from his teeth. "I have lived for 500 years. Then you've lived long enough." I twisted the stake. Draven's body shook. His claws dug deeper into my arm. I felt them scraping against bone. Darkness began closing around the edges of my vision. I thought of Lexi. I saw her standing in our kitchen, wearing my jacket and laughing while I complained. I saw her holding her camera. I saw her final photograph, Draven smiling. I placed both hands around the stake. "Die, you piece of shit." I drove it upward. The wood entered his heart. Draven's body became completely still. His golden eyes widened. A wet, gurgling sound came from his throat. Then his skin began to crack. Thin lines appeared across his face, glowing red beneath the surface. They spread down his neck and across his chest. He released my arm. I stumbled backward. Draven reached for the stake, but his fingers broke apart before touching it. They collapsed into gray ash and scattered in the wind. His arms followed, then his face. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Not anger, not pride. "Fear, no," he whispered. His body folded inward. The expensive suit fell empty as everything inside it crumbled. Ash poured onto the pavement, spreading around the wooden stake. The wind moved through the alley. It lifted the remains of Vincent Draven and carried them into the darkness. For several seconds, I stood there, staring. Then my legs gave out. I slid down the wall and sat on the ground. Blood soaked my sleeve. My chest burned with every breath. The cut across my cheek felt hot, and I was certain at least one rib was broken. But I was alive. The alley had become quiet again. The young woman was gone. I hoped she had reached the street. I hoped she had found a taxi, a police officer, or anyone who could take her somewhere safe. I hoped she never understood how close she had come to death. My Glock lay several feet away. I reached for it, but stopped when I heard footsteps at the alley entrance. The woman had returned. She stood beneath the streetlight, barefoot on one side, holding a phone against her ear. Her face was pale, and dark marks were already forming around her throat. "An ambulance is coming," she said. I nodded. "You should leave." What was he? The question remained between us. I looked at the pile of ash. A monster. She glanced toward the empty clothes. "That isn't possible." "No," I rested my head against the brick. "But it's true." Sirens sounded in the distance. The woman took a small step toward me. "Are there more?" I thought of the photographs on my wall, old faces that had never aged, unexplained bodies across different cities, Draven's powerful friends, his private clubs, his endless network of influence. "Yes," I said. Her eyes filled with fear. "How many?" "I don't know." The sirens grew louder. I looked down at the ash one final time. Vincent Draven had believed himself untouchable. He had hidden behind money, power, and centuries of fear. He had killed Lexi and countless others because he believed no one would ever come for him. He had been wrong. I leaned forward and spat onto the dark remains. That was for my sister. The wind carried the last of him away. For the first time in 4 years, the memory of Lexi did not feel like an open wound. The pain remained, and it always would, but something inside me had finally become quiet. I had found the monster who killed her. I had made him afraid, and I had watched him die. Red and blue lights appeared at the end of the alley, reflecting across the wet pavement. The woman hurried toward the approaching paramedics and police officers. I stayed where I was, holding my injured arm. My work should have ended there. That was what I had promised myself. Kill Draven, avenge Lexi, try to live again. But as the police entered the alley, I noticed something inside the empty suit he had left behind. A small black card had fallen from an inner pocket. I picked it up before anyone saw. There was no name on the front, only a silver symbol shaped like a crown above 2 sharp fangs. On the back was an address. Beneath it, a date. Tomorrow night. Draven had been expected somewhere, by someone. I closed my hand around the card. The quiet feeling inside me disappeared. Vincent Draven was dead, but he had not been alone. I looked toward the night sky between the buildings and thought of all the other families waiting for answers. All the missing people whose faces covered walls, websites, and police files. All the bodies that had been called random. The hunt was not over. It had only just begun. Story 5. The first time I saw the Bluefin Diner, it looked exactly like the kind of place a person would find in the middle of nowhere. Route 66 stretched ahead of me through the desert like a faded black ribbon. Heat rose from the road in twisting waves, making the horizon shake beneath the afternoon sun. There was nothing around me except dry land, distant hills, and the occasional cactus standing alone beside the highway. The emptiness made me feel even smaller than I already did. I had been traveling for several weeks with no real plan. Everything I owned was packed inside an old duffel bag in the back seat of my car. My clothes were wrinkled, my money was running low, and the car made a new sound almost every time I started it. A month earlier, I had lost my job. Soon after that, I had fallen out with the few friends I still had. Some of it was my fault. Some of it was theirs. In the end, it did not matter. They stopped calling, and I stopped trying to fix things. I had no close family waiting for me. There was no house, apartment, or familiar town that felt like home. Every night, I rented the cheapest motel room I could find and stared at stained ceilings until morning. Sleep rarely came. When it did, it was shallow and uneasy. I kept wondering how long it would take for someone to notice if I disappeared. The honest answer was probably forever. That was the kind of person I had become. Someone who could vanish without leaving an empty place in anyone's life. I was almost out of gas when I noticed the diner. A faded roadside sign leaned toward the highway. Several letters in the name were missing, but I could still read Bluefin Diner beneath layers of dirt and sun damage. An old gas pump stood in front of the building. It looked as if it had not worked in decades. The diner itself was long and low, with peeling blue paint and dusty windows. A broken neon fish hung above the entrance. Its tail flashed once every few seconds, sending weak blue light across the parking lot even though the sun had not yet set. A smaller sign hung beneath it from a single rusty chain. Help wanted. I slowed down. At first I only planned to stop for coffee and ask if the gas pump worked. Then I looked at the help wanted sign again. Maybe I needed more than gas. Maybe I needed a reason to stay in one place for a few days. I pulled into the parking lot and turned off the engine. The sudden silence inside the car felt heavy. No other vehicles were parked nearby. No voices came from the diner. For a moment, I considered driving away. Then the engine clicked beneath the hood, reminding me that I did not have many choices left. I took my duffel bag from the back seat, locked the car, and walked toward the entrance. The bell above the door gave a weak chime when I stepped inside. The diner was dim even in the afternoon. Several ceiling lights flickered above cracked linoleum floors. The wallpaper had once been white with small blue patterns, but age and cigarette smoke had turned it yellow. Rows of empty booths lined the windows. Their vinyl seats were split and faded. The air smelled of grease, burnt coffee, and something metallic. A man stood behind the counter. He was thin and probably in his late 60s, though exhaustion made him look older. Deep lines crossed his face. His gray hair was combed straight back, and his eyes looked hollow, as if he had not slept properly in years. He watched me without smiling. I waited for him to speak. He did not. I walked to a booth near the corner and sat down. The cracked vinyl stuck to the backs of my legs. The man continued watching me. Finally, he picked up a small notepad and slowly walked over. "What'll it be?" he asked. His voice was dry and rough. I opened the menu lying on the table. Its pages were stained with old food and coffee rings. Most of the printed prices had been crossed out and replaced by handwritten numbers. "Just coffee," I said. He nodded and returned to the counter. The coffee machine hissed and rattled as if it might break apart. A few minutes later, the man placed a chipped white mug in front of me. The coffee smelled burnt. I took a sip anyway. It was bitter enough to make me wince, but the warmth felt good in my hands. "Thanks," I said. The man gave a small nod. He started walking away, but I looked through the window at the sign outside. "You're hiring?" He stopped. For several seconds, he stood with his back to me. Then he turned around. "You need a job? I need money." That seemed to be enough of an answer. He studied me carefully. His eyes moved over my worn clothes, my duffel bag, and the tired expression I knew was on my face. "You passing through?" "I don't know yet." The old man looked toward the windows. Something in his expression changed. It might have been pity, but it disappeared too quickly for me to be certain. "You can start tonight," he said. I blinked. "You don't need my name? References? No, you don't want to know if I have experience? You can pour coffee and clean, can't you?" "I suppose." "Then you have enough experience." His answer should have made me suspicious. Instead, I felt relieved. He gestured for me to follow him. "I'll show you around." The tour did not take long. He showed me the counter, the register, and the coffee machine. "It sticks," he said. "Hit the side twice if it stops working." He led me through a swinging door into the kitchen. The room was small and dirty. Old pots hung above a stove covered in black grease. A leaking pipe dripped steadily into a metal sink. "The grill works," he said. "Don't use the left burner." "Why?" "It leaks." "Gas?" He did not answer. He pointed toward a narrow storage room filled with canned food, cleaning supplies, and boxes that looked older than I was. Then he showed me the restrooms, the back exit, and a small office with a locked door. "What's in there?" I asked. "My things." The answer made it clear I was not supposed to ask again. There was a window above the kitchen sink. Through it, I could see the parking lot and the dark shape of a lake beyond the diner. The lake surprised me. It looked completely out of place in the dry desert. There were no trees growing around it and no plants along the shore. The water was black and still, even though the wind moved dust across the parking lot. "How deep is that?" I asked. The old man glanced at the lake. "Deep enough." He walked back toward the front. "That's everything," he said. "What time does the shift end?" "Sunrise, and what do I do if someone comes in?" "Serve them." "What if no one comes?" Clean, he took a coat from beneath the counter. "You're leaving?" "Yes." I looked around the empty diner. "You're putting me on the night shift alone on my first day?" "You said you needed work." "I do." "Then work." He put on his coat and walked toward the door. Before stepping outside, he looked back at me. "Good luck, kid." The way he said it made my skin prickle. The bell chimed as he left. I watched him cross the parking lot and climb into an old pickup truck. He did not wave before driving away. Soon, the sound of his engine disappeared. I was alone. For the first hour, I tried to stay busy. I wiped the counter, swept the floor, and filled several containers with sugar packets. I cleaned the coffee machine until I realized its brown color was probably permanent. No customers came. Outside, the sun sank behind the desert hills. The sky turned orange, then purple, and finally black. The broken neon fish began glowing more brightly against the night. The diner seemed to change after dark. During the day, it had looked old and neglected. At night, it felt watchful. The shadows beneath the booths seemed deeper. Every sound echoed across the empty room. The refrigerator hummed behind the counter, and the building made soft cracking noises as the desert air cooled. I went into the kitchen to look for something to eat. I found half a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. The bread was dry, and the meat inside tasted questionable, but hunger made me finish it. While standing near the sink, I noticed the lake again. Moonlight rested on its surface. The water was so still that it looked solid. Then I heard the music. At first, I thought it came from the radio in the diner. I checked beneath the counter, but there was no radio. The sound was soft and distant. It resembled someone singing without words. The melody rose and fell slowly, beautiful and sad. I walked toward the front windows. The music grew clearer. It was coming from the lake. I stood there listening, unable to look away from the dark water. The melody stirred something inside me. It seemed to understand the loneliness I had carried for weeks. There was comfort in it, almost as if someone were calling me home. My feet began moving. I walked toward the entrance. The closer I got, the stronger the music became. Warmth filled my chest. My worries began fading. I stopped thinking about the old man, the empty diner, or the strange lake. All I wanted was to step outside. My hand reached for the door handle. Then, something caught my eye. A corner of white paper stuck out from a tear in one of the booth seats. I stopped. The music continued calling from outside. I walked to the booth and pulled the paper free. It had been folded several times and pushed deep into the damaged vinyl. The edges were torn, and dark stains covered one side. Someone had written 4 instructions in uneven handwriting. Do not go near the lake under any circumstances. If you see wet footprints leading from the lake into the diner, clean them immediately with hot water. If you hear scratching on the windows, keep your eyes on your work. The diner lights must stay dim, but they must never be turned off. I read the rules twice. The music outside became louder. I looked toward the door. My hand was still resting near the handle. A feeling of danger passed through me so suddenly that my stomach tightened. I stepped back. The melody changed. For one brief moment, it sounded angry. Then it faded into the distance. I returned to the counter and placed the note beside the register. The dark stains on the paper looked like dried blood. I did not sleep that morning. At sunrise, the old man returned. He entered without asking how the shift had gone. His eyes moved through the diner, checking the floor, the windows, and the lights. Then he looked at me. "You're still here," he said. The words sounded almost surprised. Was I not supposed to be? He ignored the question. I wanted to show him the note, but something stopped me. I folded it and placed it in my pocket. "I'll be back tonight," I said. He gave a slow nod. I went outside and tried to sleep in my car. The heat quickly became unbearable, so I moved the vehicle beneath the narrow shadow of the diner. I lowered the windows and closed my eyes. When sleep finally came, I dreamed about the lake. I stood waist deep in black water while the melody surrounded me. Something wrapped around my ankles beneath the surface. I tried to return to shore, but the lake grew deeper with every step. Then long fingers closed around my leg and pulled. I woke with a gasp. My entire body was covered in sweat. The lake was visible through the windshield. For a moment, I thought I saw a pale face floating in the water. Then the light changed, and it was gone. That evening, the old man left without saying goodbye. My second shift began quietly. Around midnight, I decided to clean the restrooms. I took a bucket, a rag, and a bottle of strong cleaner into the back hall. The mirror above the sink was covered in grime. When I looked into it, my reflection appeared pale and unclear. I scrubbed the sinks and wiped the floors. All the while, I heard water dripping. At first, I assumed it came from the kitchen pipe. Then I realized the sound was coming from the diner. Drip, drip, drip. I left the restroom and stepped into the hall. My heart stopped. Wet footprints crossed the diner floor. They began at the front door and continued between the booths. The prints were long and narrow. They resembled human feet, but the toes were joined by thin webbing. Water gathered inside each mark. The trail led directly toward the counter, toward the place where I had been sitting. I remembered the note. Clean them immediately with hot water. I ran into the kitchen and grabbed the largest bucket I could find. My hands shook as I turned on the hot tap. The water took too long to warm. While I waited, I heard another drip from the front. Then another. I imagined more footprints appearing on the floor. Finally, steam rose from the sink. I filled the bucket and carried it through the swinging door. My foot caught on the edge of a loose tile. The bucket slipped. Hot water splashed across my hands and the front of my shirt. Pain shot through my skin, but I forced myself to lift the bucket again. The footprints looked darker now. The water inside them had turned almost black. I dropped to my knees and began scrubbing. Steam rose from the floor. A low hiss came from somewhere beneath me. The sound did not resemble water touching hot metal. It sounded alive. The first footprint faded, then the second. I scrubbed harder. A whisper moved through the diner. I could not understand the words, but the voice sounded close enough to be beside my ear. I refused to look around. The footprints disappeared one by one. When I reached the final print near the counter, something moved in the reflection of the front window. A tall shape stood behind me. I spun around. No one was there, only empty booths and dim lights. I looked back at the window. My own pale reflection stared at me. The footprints were gone. but the diner remained freezing cold. When the owner arrived that morning, I told him what had happened. I described the footprints, the whisper, and the shadow in the window. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he sighed. "You're tired," he said. That was not tiredness. Night work affects the mind. The footprints were real. You probably tracked water in from the restroom. They came from the front door. He avoided my eyes. I pulled the note from my pocket and placed it on the counter. His face changed. Only slightly. But I saw it. "You know about this," I said. He picked up the note. "Where did you find it?" "In the booth." He folded it and put it in his pocket. Someone was playing a joke. There was blood on it. Old ketchup. It wasn't ketchup. He walked toward the coffee machine. "You need rest." I stared at his back. "You're lying." He did not turn around. I took a breath and made my decision. "I'm working one more night," I said. "Then you pay me, and I leave." The old man slowly faced me. For the first time, I saw something close to amusement in his hollow eyes. "Sure, kid." His mouth twisted into a small smile. "Tonight will be your last night." I spent the day trying to sleep. Whenever I closed my eyes, I heard the lake's melody. By evening, clouds had gathered over the desert. The air felt heavy, and distant lightning flashed without thunder. The old man was already wearing his coat when I entered the diner. He looked at me for a long moment. "Keep the lights on," he said. "I know." "Do you?" He walked past me. Before leaving, he placed one hand on the door. For a second, I thought he might warn me. Instead, he stepped outside and drove away. The diner felt different that night. The shadows were darker and seemed to stretch farther across the floor. The lake was not visible through the kitchen window because a thick fog had formed above the water. No wind moved outside. Around 1 a.m, the jukebox turned on. I jumped so hard that I nearly dropped the coffee pot. The machine had not worked during my first 2 shifts. Its lights were dark, and there was no money inside it. Now weak red and green lights flashed across its front. Music poured from the speakers. It was the same melody I had heard from the lake, but it sounded damaged. The notes were slow in some places and violently fast in others. A woman's voice rose above the music, singing words in a language I did not know. I hurried to the jukebox and pressed the stop button. Nothing happened. I pulled at the power cord. It was not connected to the wall. The song grew louder. The sound seemed to enter my skull. Then the scratching began. Something dragged a hard object across the front window. I froze. Scratch, pause, scratch. I remembered the 3rd rule. If you hear scratching on the windows, keep your eyes on your work. I returned to the counter. A stack of clean plates sat beside the sink. I picked one up and began drying it with a towel, even though it was already dry. The scratching moved across the glass. Long, slow lines. I kept my eyes down. The sound reached the window directly in front of me. Something tapped 3 times. I tightened my grip on the plate. A voice whispered my name. It came from the other side of the glass. I continued wiping the plate. The voice spoke again. It mentioned my old job. Then, it whispered the names of the friends who had stopped speaking to me. It knew the things they had said. It knew the cruel things I had said back. My hands began trembling. The scratching continued. The voice became softer. It promised that I would never feel alone again. All I had to do was look. I stared at the plate. The warped song from the jukebox stopped. The scratching stopped too. Silence filled the diner. I slowly breathed out. Then I saw the figure from the corner of my eye. It stood outside the window. It was taller than any person I had ever seen. Its shoulders were narrow, and long, wet hair covered much of its face. Its skin appeared pale beneath the neon light. Two shining eyes watched me through the glass. The creature smiled. Its mouth opened farther than a human mouth should. Thin lips pulled back, revealing several rows of sharp, uneven teeth. I wanted to look away. Instead, I found myself turning toward it. The creature's eyes held mine. The diner disappeared from my thoughts. I heard the beautiful lake melody again, clear and gentle. The creature whispered that it understood me. It said I had been unwanted for a long time. It said I was tired of being invisible. It said there was a place for me beneath the water. My hand moved across the counter toward the window latch. The front door suddenly flew open. The old man rushed inside. His face was filled with terror. The creature's spell broke. I stepped away from the window. The old man looked from me to the figure outside. "Sorry, kid," he whispered. His voice shook. "You weren't supposed to make it this far." "What does that mean?" He ignored me and crossed the diner. He reached for the window latch. I stared at him. "What are you doing?" The creature's grin widened. The old man placed both hands on the latch. I grabbed his shoulder. "Stop," he pushed me away. "I have no choice." "Yes, you do. You don't understand." He pulled the latch open. Cold, wet air entered the diner. The smell of mud and dead fish filled the room. The creature placed one long hand against the edge of the window. Dark water dripped from its fingers. "What is it?" I asked. The old man looked at me. "She keeps me safe." "By killing people?" His eyes filled with tears. "I didn't want this." "How many?" He did not answer. "How many people have you given to it?" "It's never enough," he said. "No matter how many I bring, it always comes back." The truth became clear. The help wanted sign, the immediate job, the night shift. The old man had not hired me because he needed an employee. He had chosen me because no one would search for me. The creature began pulling itself through the window. Its arms were too long. Its fingers bent in several places, gripping the frame like the legs of an insect. I stepped back. The old man moved toward me. "Please," he said. "It will be quick. You don't know that. I've seen it before." The answer filled me with rage. He lunged. His hands closed around my wrists.